Okay, so imagine this like blackhawk helicopters up in the sky and drones scanning across the landscape and this joint task force like we've never seen before. And this isn't a movie or anything. This is like the new reality at the Canada-U.S. border.
Yeah, it's quite a shift. Canada is definitely taking a much stronger stance on border security now.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what we're going to be diving into today. We've got some amazing sources that give us details about all the new technologies that they're using and all the policy changes they've already made and just like what's behind this whole like ramped up security along the border.
It's going to be really interesting to see how all this affects the relationship with the U.S.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So let's just jump right in and start talking about these Black Hawk helicopters. I mean, we're not talking about like your everyday traffic helicopter. These are like military-grade helicopters that are now going to be patrolling the border. Public Safety Minister McGuinty announced they were going to be using them just this week. And get this, they're going to be ready to go by Friday.
Wow, that's so fast. You know, it's interesting because this isn't just some like quick reaction to something that happened. The RCMP has been asking for this kind of advanced air surveillance for years. It seems like all the recent events and maybe even pressure from the U.S. and the increase in illegal crossings has finally made the government take some action.
So it sounds like a bunch of things happened at once that made them decide to do this. But the Blackhawks are only part of it. They're also going to be using 60 new drones along the border and building new surveillance towers. And get this, they're going to be using high-tech stuff like X-ray machines and even chemical analyzers.
Wow, so they're not messing around. It sounds like they're really trying to cover all their bases and make sure the border's secure. And what's really interesting is they're going to be using those X-ray machines and chemical analyzers at border crossings to check vehicles, not just for luggage at airports.
Oh, wow. So they can find like hidden compartments in cars and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And they can use the chemical analyzers to make sure people aren't smuggling dangerous things across the border.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like they're building this huge defense system with all these different layers. So we were just talking about addressing vulnerabilities, and I wanted to switch gears a little and talk about the visa restrictions they put in place last year for Mexican nationals. I heard this has really changed the number of illegal crossings.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Immigration Minister Mark Miller said that since June 2024, when they put the restrictions in place, there's been something like an 89% reduction in illegal crossings.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, it really shows that making changes to policies can actually work. But it's important to look at it from all angles. I mean, even though the numbers show a decrease in crossings, it could also mean that people are just trying to cross in other places that might be even more dangerous.
Well, it's a good point. So it's kind of like a trade-off. And it doesn't sound like the government's stopping there. They're saying they're going to start really punishing immigration consultants who tell their clients how to take advantage of the system. We're talking like fines up to $1.5 million.
Wow. Yeah, that'll make them think twice. It sounds like they're really serious about stopping illegal crossings, not just by making the border more secure, but also by going after the people who are helping people cross illegally.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it sounds like they're really trying to close any loopholes. And what about this new joint pre-clearance operation with the U.S.? It sounds like something totally new. Are you saying that Canada is going to be the first country ever to have a pre-clearance process on U.S. soil?
Yep, that's exactly it. Imagine Canadian border officers right there in the U.S. working with American officers to check travelers before they even come to Canada.
Wow.
That's never been done before. So it definitely raises some questions about like whose laws apply, where, and how they'll share responsibility for all of this.
It's almost like the border's not really a line on a map anymore, but more like a shared security zone. So for those of us who aren't experts on all the border stuff,
Yeah.
can you break down what pre-clearance actually means? Like, what does it look like for a regular traveler?
Okay, sure. Let's say you're at an airport in the U.S. and you're about to get on a flight to Canada. Instead of having to go through customs and immigration, when you land in Canada, you do it right there in the U.S. before you even get on the plane.
Oh.
So they check your documents and ask you some questions, and if everything's good, you're pre-cleared to enter Canada. That means when you get to Canada, you don't have to wait in those long customs lines. You can just go straight to where you're going.
So it's like a fast track. And it probably makes things more secure, too, because they catch any problems before people even cross the border.
Exactly.
Speaking of making things more efficient, the government also just got rid of something called flagpoling.
Oh, yeah, flagpoling. So that was when people from other countries who were in Canada temporarily would leave the country, like just for a little bit, and then come right back in. And they did this to use certain immigration services. They were basically taking advantage of a loophole.
Oh, wow. So they were like just driving across the border and then coming back.
Yeah, something like that.
And I heard that by stopping this, They've saved immigration officials something like 8,000 workdays.
Yeah, something like that.
That's a lot of time. So now they can use that time to work on more important things.
Exactly. It shows how they're trying to make things more efficient. It's not just about using more technology or having more people at the border. It's also about using the resources they already have in a better way.
Yeah, like getting rid of unnecessary things and focusing on what's really important.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting when you think about how much borders have changed over time.
Yeah, they really have. I mean, it used to be so simple, like the border was just a line on a map. But now with all this crazy technology like drones and pre-clearance, it's like the border isn't even really a line anymore.
Yeah, it's definitely becoming a lot more blurry. And that makes you think about things like, national sovereignty and laws and even personal freedom. Like if Canadian border officers are working in the US, whose rules do they follow? It gets pretty complicated legally and politically, and I don't think we've really figured it all out yet.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And it gets even more complicated when you start thinking about why people are crossing these borders. I mean, we can talk all day about technology and policies,
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, it's people making these decisions. And there's so many different reasons why they might do it.
Exactly. And a lot of those reasons are really personal and complicated. It's important to remember that not everyone who crosses a border illegally is doing something bad. Some people are just trying to get away from danger or persecution, or they might be trying to get back to their families.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that there's a real person behind every border crossing. It's easy to get caught up in all the security stuff, but we can't forget about the people involved. Imagine being so desperate that you're willing to risk your life to cross a border illegally.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to think about what might happen when you make security really tight. I mean, it might stop some people from crossing illegally, but it could also make it harder for people who have a legitimate reason to cross to get the protection they need.
So it's like a trade-off again, trying to keep people safe, but also being fair and compassionate.
Exactly. And it's not just a conversation happening between Canada and the US, it's a global conversation. All around the world, countries are trying to figure out how to manage their borders in a way that's effective and humane.
Yeah, it feels like things are changing so fast.
Yeah.
And technology is a big part of that.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what border security is going to look like in 10 or 20 years.
It's hard to say for sure, but I think it's pretty safe to say that technology is going to be even more important in the future. I mean, we're already seeing things like facial recognition and AI being used at borders.
Yeah, it's like something out of a science fiction movie.
Yeah.
But it also makes you think about privacy and all that. Like, how much surveillance is too much? When does security start to take away our freedoms?
Yeah, those are really important questions, and we need to be talking about them. We can't just use new technology without thinking about the consequences, especially for people who are already vulnerable.
Yeah, it's like a whole new set of challenges. It's almost like we need a whole new way of thinking about how we manage borders in this digital age.
I think you're right.
So how do we do that?
Yeah.
How do we balance security with fairness and make sure everyone has access?
That's a tough one. But I think it starts with understanding that everyone has a role to play. It's not just about governments and technology companies. We all need to be part of the conversation.
So it's like a shared responsibility.
Exactly.
Okay, so before we move on, I want to go back to something you said earlier about the U.S. How much of this change in Canada's approach to border security is because of pressure from the U.S.?
That's a really complicated question. I mean, it's clear that the U.S. has had some influence. The way they talk about immigration and the way they're trying to stop illegal crossings, it's definitely had an impact on Canada.
So it's not just about Canada reacting to what the U.S. is doing. It's more like Canada is trying to adjust to this whole new global situation where border security is really important.
Exactly. And things are changing all the time. With all the populism and nationalism in different parts of the world, it seems like a lot of countries are becoming more strict about their borders. Canada is not immune to that.
It's like a domino effect.
Yeah.
What happens in one part of the world affects other parts of the world. So with all this going on, how do we make sense of it all? How do we balance security with being open and compassionate?
That's the million-dollar question. There are no easy answers. But I think the first step is realizing that it's a really complicated issue. Border security isn't just about keeping people out. It's about managing how people and things move across borders in a way that's good for everyone.
So it's not about us versus them. It's about working together to find solutions.
Exactly. And those solutions need to take into account all the different factors, the reasons why people migrate, the economic and social issues, and the ethical implications of our decisions.
It's a lot to think about. But it's definitely something we need to be talking about, especially with technology changing so quickly.
Mhm.
It makes me think about what you said before about borders not really mattering as much in the future.
Yeah, it's a strange idea. Like, it's kind of exciting, but also a little scary. We might be heading towards a world where it doesn't matter so much where you are physically, but who you are online is what's really important.
Right. It's like in those sci-fi books where you need some kind of digital ID to do anything, not a passport or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. And that brings up a whole bunch of other questions like who gets to decide who has those digital IDs? And what about people who can't get online or don't have the right technology? Do they just get left behind?
Yeah, it's like a new kind of digital divide
Mm.
where if you don't have the right technology, you can't really participate in the world.
Exactly. So we need to be really careful about how we develop and use these technologies. We have to think about the consequences, especially for people who are already struggling.
Yeah, for sure. It's almost like we need some new rules for the digital age. Rules that make sure everyone is treated fairly and has the same opportunities.
I think you're right. We need to start thinking about digital citizenship just as seriously as we think about being a citizen of a country. Everyone should have rights and responsibilities online just like they do in the real world.
That makes sense. But how do we balance that with needing to keep things secure? I mean, the whole point of having borders is to stop bad things from happening,
Yeah.
right? Like terrorism or crime or even diseases spreading. How can we stay safe if borders don't really matter anymore?
That's the big question, isn't it? I think the answer is somewhere in the middle. We need to find a balance between security and freedom, between control and trust. We need to use technology that can stop real threats, but not in a way that takes away people's freedoms.
Yeah, it sounds like a tough balance to find.
It is, and it's something we'll have to keep working on as technology keeps changing.
So what do you think? What the future of borders is going to look like?
It's really hard to say.
But one thing's for sure. The choices we make today are going to shape that future.
Yeah.
The technology we create, the policies we make, and the rules we decide on.
They're all going to play a part.
And it's important to remember that these choices affect real people.
Absolutely.
Like you said before,
Mm.
families trying to find a safe place, students going to school in other countries, businesses doing work around the world. How we manage our borders is going to have a real impact on their lives.
Exactly.
It's not just some theoretical debate. It's about real people and their lives.
It is.
So we need to be really thoughtful about the decisions we make.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we've just scratched the surface of this whole border thing.
Yeah, we have.
But it's a conversation we need to keep having.
Definitely.
And it's not just for politicians and tech people.
Everyone needs to be involved.
We all have a part to play in figuring out the future of borders. Okay, so we're going to wrap up our deep dive into Canada-U.S. border security here. But before we go, we want you to think about something. As technology keeps advancing and the world gets more and more connected, what's going to happen to borders? What role will technology play? And how are we going to balance keeping things secure with giving people freedom to move around?
It's a tough question.
Yeah, but it's one we all need to be thinking about.
Exact.
So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep talking about these things.
The future of borders is really up to us.
That's a great way to put it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning and keep those conversations going.